Howard Cummings, how does director Steven Soderbergh's penchant for long takes impact how you design your sets? Like, how connected is everything?
Well, the sets that we have are really specific to Steven in a lot of ways, and connectivity is one of them. And he's really exploring that this year in the second season. In a way, he took it even farther than he did last year. So we do a lot of, you could have a 2-page dialogue scene and not cut out of it. The way he chose to actually use the camera and with this sort of handheld allows him to be able to be standing and then sit on a rolling dolly and do like a 360-degree shot and then get off the dolly, but you're not really aware of that's what's going on. So to facilitate that, one of the things is if you come and see the sets, they're built more like a building. They're not like standalone separate rooms. They're all connected. And so you can actually stand in one end of the hospital, and then last year, for instance, Algernon is operating on somebody in his clinic, and he runs out of suturing material. And so he has to run through the hospital and go into the operating theater to try to get some of that. And Steven did that all in one take because I built all this, he ran through all the hallways we had, and they all connect. So all the sets are double-sided, and so they feel like real rooms. And one thing as well is that other than the exterior light that's coming through the windows on the sets, which is movie light, everything on the interior, it's all practicals. And that's because he uses the red camera, and it's incredibly light sensitive. Something that was important to Steven was if there is a scene with an oil lamp, it was actually the oil lamp that was lighting. It wasn't like a oil lamp that had a light bulb put in it and we were pretending. It was the real thing. And so we did some early tests and found that we could actually get away with it. So there's some really interesting scenes where, and a lot of the storyline of last year was the invention of electricity and its introduction and how it changed people's lives, and how technology in general was making the world grow at a real rapid pace that people even couldn't keep up with it. This was important to the storytelling. So we started out the hospital, like for instance, with gas lighting, and then they got electricity. And we did some tests, and the early light bulbs weren't very efficient. And they actually, we determined, put out less light than the gas fixtures. So it was sort of the opposite of what people would think, like, oh, it's getting brighter. It wasn't. It was actually yellower and warmer. And so it's really, so therefore, because he uses the practical lighting, the sets have all full ceilings, and they're built like rooms. So people are often confused when they come and they go, why is this building in this warehouse? And I go, it's not a building, it's the set. And you have to kind of explain to them that it's just part of the way. You can't have real interactive lighting if it's not a fully in, if it's not like a location. So our hospital feels a lot like a location when you're walking through it.
Wow. So what kind of rules did you set for yourself, like with regard to your color palette or anything like that?
Well, Steven, at the beginning of last season, what he said to me, he said, if I could make this a black and white series, I would. He said, but nobody would fund it, so I can't. And that's all he said. He didn't say anything else to me. And I thought, well, the one thing, the major set I'm building, it's the heart of the story, is the hospital, right? So I thought, well, there's a perfect opportunity to sort of set up a palette. And I talked to Ellen Mirajnik, who's the costume designer, and I said, so what do you think the clothing is going to be? And she was already headed in a very almost no color kind of look. And, doctors wore dark suits, nurses wore white. It was this, so we had sort of a black and white thing going. And I said, why don't we try to make everything in the hospital and related to the hospital almost look like you're looking at a black and white picture? So so if you look at the hospital, it's black, white, like 4 shades of gray, and brown. And the brown is because of wood. I had to have wood in there. So, and that's it. So a lot of the operating theater pictures especially look because you have the operating side of the theater is very kind of white, although it's light gray. And then this area where the audience is, the doctors are looking, is very dark brown and black. So you really get the sense of feels like a black and white picture, only people are in it, you know. So that was sort of, and then we went from there to the different parts of the, you know, New York that we are going to see. So for instance, at the outside of the hospital, you know, we dirted streets to make it feel more like 1900. And so, which was a big project and hadn't really been done in New York in a long time. And I actually used light gray dirt for the area outside. And again, it was to sort of make it feel like a black and white picture.
Yeah.
Yet when you go to some place like, say, the Lower East Side, I use dirt, like brown, mucky, dirty dirt. And and then when you go to like somebody like the Robertsons, who are the rich people, they have cobblestones, you know, and so they're actually, so in the different worlds, Ellen Moroshnik and I sat down and we sort of gave them color palettes. And so the Lower East Side's very earthy. The black neighborhoods have more color and lots of pattern, although they're still sort of earth toned, but they have there's a lot of pattern going on. And then the rich people are the only people who have blue in any kind of thing. So, because we're cutting between these different worlds, we wanted to thematically tie them together so that you always, even if you didn't know where you were right away, just by sheer temperature of what you were looking at, you knew what you were, you know, what world you were in.
So you guys are set in New York. You also shoot there, but you know, a lot of productions aren't like that. So how did you come to that decision?
We talked about shooting other places, and I felt it was important to try to do it in New York because it was such a New York story. And I sort of promised the guys, Stephen and the producer, Greg Jacobs, that I would deliver New York and make it 1900, you know, that I knew how to do that. And so, and because I felt like the architecture and the sort of, I mean, clearly you could go to some place like, you know, that has old architecture in the US even, and do something similar. Chicago, for instance, and, you know, has a lot of this kind of architecture, and it's that kind of urban. But I felt there was just some iconic New York, you just kind of, you were going to know what it is, that can't be replaced. So, but that involved me trying to figure out how the heck do I, because, you know, it doesn't look like 1900. A lot of Brooklyn, actually, where we ended up basing our studio in Brooklyn, because a lot of Brooklyn still has held on to its 1900s look. You know, the buildings are lower. They're not the skyscrapers of Manhattan. And it has really the sense of what old New York was. It's still in Brooklyn. So we based our studio out of Brooklyn because we felt a lot of locations would come from Brooklyn, and that's what ended up happening. But we do in fact shoot all over Manhattan. This year we're shooting really all over, because we're shooting up in Yonkers, down in Staten Island, the Bronx, Crown Heights, Red Hook. It's just kind of everywhere. And then the Upper East Side, and, you know, the Upper West Side, you know, downtown, you know, the Lower East Side. So, and I think the show really, it gives it an authenticity that I think really we kind of took full advantage to explore.
Can you tease any big set for the second season?
Actually, we have a lot of this second season seems to be location, location, location. It's like we have a lot of the world really opened up. So we still have the hospital and the sort of the environs of the hospital. And last year we had a lot of big street scenes in the sort of the Lower East Side and sort of more depressed areas. And this year we've actually expanded to the super rich and the super rich. And so so we're shooting in a lot of super giant, elegant mansions, and and there's big events, and but we've also but balanced with that, we have something akin to Coney Island. There were these things called dime museums that were down sort of in 14th Street or lower area, Bowery. And you could pay a dime and you'd go in and you'd see like a vaudeville act or some kind of medical oddity or, an orchestra or wax figures. It was kind of this hodgepodge of entertainment. It was like a little entertainment palace. So we got to make one of those, and that was great. That was really a lot of fun because it was, I ended up putting it in a Victorian warehouse, and so it had a giant arcade, and you pass by, knife throwers and magicians, and so that was fun. We also had dance halls, which last year we didn't have. Thackeray ends up frequenting one particularly very large dance hall, so we have showgirls, and it was a good opportunity. What I found out in my research was one of the first place Edison actually installed light bulbs was actually in a dance hall. There was a very popular dance hall, and he personally installed them and so the dance hall actually had the first use of like light bulbs. And so I just took that a step further, and sort of there's the stage is outlined in light bulbs, and so like electricity's everywhere now. We have cars this year, which we didn't last year. And so we actually had the early automobiles looked more like, they called them horseless carriages. And that's because they actually look like a carriage. And a lot of them were electric. It's so weird because we've gone back to that now. But they were early cars, a lot of them, the production of gas hadn't quite kicked in yet. So the early ones were electric, and they didn't run very long, and they didn't go very fast, like 25 miles an hour, more like a golf cart. And but we had some the prop guys found a carriage maker in Montreal who actually fabricated on our specs these cars based on Oldsmobile was actually the first sort of producer of cars. And then it was a free-for-all of car makers after that. They're all different kinds of cars. And then Ford was the one who figured out how to manufacture and make it cheap. So in the beginning, they were expensive and not widely used, but we made several cars, and the Knick actually gets Cleary last year blackmails Cornelia for money, and he takes her money and he buys an electric truck and he converts it into an ambulance for as a way of making more money on his job. So we have this electric ambulance, which is quite nice, and so that was fun. But other locations, we have some docks. You see immigrants coming and going to Ellis Island, and steamships, and so there's a Chinatown, although it's in San Francisco, because Cornelia goes to, at the end of the last season, Cornelia gets exiled. She goes off gets married to Philip, and they go to San Francisco, and she's in Chinatown in San Francisco, which we actually just did last week, and we actually used an area in Yonkers because Yonkers has got a very Victorian sections, and it has lots of hills. And I used to live in San Francisco, and so this one particular neighborhood, I was going, this is really similar to the topography and the buildings. And of course, we had to redo the whole lower parts of the buildings. The stores and stuff were all modern, so we had to reface them and then put dirt down and populate them with Chinese extras. And
different colored dirt, I guess.
A
different colored dirt.
Yes, it was. I used different dirt, and I used gravel and dirt mixture, which turned out in the end not to be very popular with people because it was particularly dusty, and so we probably won't use that again. But yeah, so it's been so there are some fun new things coming.
Cool.
But mostly we're outside the Knick in a larger way than we were last year.
Huh. So at the Art Directors Guild Awards, you were nominated, and you submitted the episodes Method and Madness and Working Late a Lot, which are actually the first and eighth episodes of the season. So I'm wondering, how did you choose to submit those ones, and are they the same that you're submitting to the Emmys?
Well, it's an interesting question. I made a mistake, and I was supposed to pick 1, 7, and 8, and somehow I didn't get 7 in there. So I was allowed to have 3, and I only picked 1 and 8. 1 was, for obvious reasons, made the most sense, and it's the pilot as well as being episode 1. So that was a no-brainer. It was a tough decision because I was trying to show the range of projects we were. I mean, so because 8 had both high and low, and there had rich people and sort of the texture of the Lower East Side, and so I kind of gravitated toward that, and so 7 as well reinforced that. So I'm happy to say that I now have 3 choices, and that's what I originally intended to do. So.
Also, recently at the Emmys, they split the categories between period pieces and contemporary and fantasy pieces. Do you agree with this change, or do you kind of judge art direction, production design very similarly, regardless of the time period?
No, I welcomed it because it seemed that contemporary shows had a really hard time standing a chance of getting recognized, their work getting recognized, and so because it's much easier to vote for a fantasy piece or a historical piece, because it's so more evident for people. And so, but there's some great contemporary design. So, like American Horror Story, for instance, had some great contemporary design. And so, although it's now in the fantasy category as well, and especially last season. So I think it's good. What was funny at the Art Directors Guild Award is that there was a lot of talk about how they should split fantasy and period now, because that category it's grown a lot, and then HBO and now everyone, Netflix, that the choice used to be quite small, and so it made more sense to have it all in one category. But now there's so much more content that you can't, and then we have European shows, things like Pinky Blinders, or there's a million other shows that we're all like kind of in the same world, and so to be able to separate those, to be able to judge them for what they are, I think I thought it was a really good idea.
Okay, and finally, what's most challenging about the Magic Mike sequel that you have coming up?
Well, it's a whole different thing. It's very funny, like for instance, especially like working with Steven and doing such divergent I mean, I don't know how you could get more divergent than 1900 New York and Magic Mike, and so. Oh, and one of the things, like in a major way, was that Magic Mike 2, for instance, it's mostly in Florida, and then they make their way up to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and so it's just like color. There's like a ton of color, and it's and it's a comedy. You know what I mean? So it's just like I had to tell Steven, you got to be prepared for the fact that this is going to be colorful. He's just not like a guy who like gravitates toward colorful stuff, and I said, but really that's what this should be. It's got to be all about like turquoise and orange and anything you could throw at it, to try to sell sort of that the Florida quality of it. It's because it was really important to the story, and I think also there's a great spontaneity to the project. And one of the things that actually was fun about working on Magic Mike 1 and 2 was the guys. The story is in a large part these guys, the actors, help define their characters. And what's great about Steven is that he's very collaborative in a way that he will, somebody brings something to the table and he'll recognize it. And if it's of value, he'll accept it. He just doesn't have doesn't dictate how this is going to be. So for instance, all those guys would come to me with all their what they wanted for their props and how did it look, and this guy wouldn't pick this, and he would, and what they were doing, different acts and what their act was, and and working with the choreographer. There's a lot of dancing, and it's a heavy choreo. It's weird. It's almost like Step Up, one of those shows. So which is a whole different kettle of fish than what magic what the Knick brings to the table. So, but fun. It was, and they're wonderful. That whole group was, and the reason I wanted to do the second one was that they were so much fun to work with, and they all had really, really good ideas actually. And so I would do my best to try to make it happen for them. So, however crazy it was. And Matthew McConaughey on the first one had these completely over the top ideas, but they were all based on really good storytelling. And so I really tried my hardest to make it happen for him because it was the right thing to do.
Okay, well, Howard, thanks very much on behalf of Gold Derby, and we look forward to the second season of the Knick and also seeing you pick up another Emmy.
Oh, I'm for that too. Thank you. Okay. Good talking to you.